Daniel Shaw committed what his colleagues at the Aldridge Institute of Geophysical Research would later call an act of academic suicide. He set out alone into the heart of the most desolate and inhospitable massif, an area known only to a small circle of guides and topographers as Echo Cauldron. Shaw wasn't the kind of person one might imagine when hearing the word adventurer. In his early 40s, he was a dry, trim man with a watchful, constantly analyzing gaze hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses. His passion, his obsession, was sound. Not music, but the physics of sound, its fundamental nature. For 10 years, he nurtured a theory that colleagues politely called controversial and, behind his back, crazy. Daniel Shaw believed that the Earth's crust, especially in zones of tectonic activity and specific geological formations, could not only conduct sound but also store it, like magnetic tape. He called this the lithophonic effect, the ability of stone to record voices, noises, and even, he suspected, the emotional outbursts of bygone eras within its crystal lattice. The Cauldron of Echoes was the holy grail for him. Local legends, uncovered in the dusty archives of the Geographical Society, claimed it was a place where echoes had a life of their own. They didn't simply repeat what was said. They distorted it, amplifying whispers to a rumble and shouts to a deafening roar. It was said that sometimes it returned sounds that no one had ever made, the ringing of bells that never existed in the mountains, or distant rumbles of thunder under a clear sky. For sure, this wasn't superstition, but proof of the work of a gigantic, natural lithophone. His expedition was meticulously planned. He took with him the best portable equipment available in the mid-1980s, a Marantz digital voice recorder, high-sensitivity microphones, and geophones for recording low-frequency vibrations, and, surprisingly for a scientist, a state-of-the-art Canon AE-1 program camera with extra film. In his field journal, he noted, "If the theory is correct and the anomaly is not only auditory but also, perhaps, spatio-temporal, visual recording may prove more important than audio." His camp was set up on a small plateau in the center of the cauldron. It overlooked an amphitheater of black basalt cliffs, rising to the sky like a giant organ. The first days were devoted to routine work, mapping, measuring background noise levels, recording test sounds, from hand claps to tuning forks. His voice in these recordings is calm, businesslike, and full of scientific zeal. But with each passing day, his tone changed. The reports he radioed once a day became increasingly agitated. The reverberation level exceeds the calculated value by 300%. The echo is returning cleaner than the original signal, as if someone is filtering and amplifying it. Low-frequency vibrations unrelated to seismic activity have been detected. His last communication took place on September 18, 1985, at 4:30 p.m. local time. Daniel Shaw's voice, usually so reserved, trembled with genuine, barely contained excitement. "Base, this is Shaw. Over. I don't know how to describe it. I was right, but the scale, I found the source. This isn't just a geological formation. It's a system, a perfect acoustic system. The effect is more powerful than I imagined. It doesn't just repeat, it interacts." Today I experimented with a recording of a simple tuning fork. The echo returned with new harmonics that weren't in the original signal, like someone finishing a melody. At the base, the operator asked him to clarify the data. The only response was static, through which Shaw's voice, now detached, almost a whisper, cut through. Tomorrow I'll try to contact him. Using a human voice. He must understand. No, not understand. He must hear. Over. His voice was no longer heard on the airwaves. The silence he had come to study had swallowed him up. Chapter 2. A blank spot on the map. The silence, which lasted for more than 48 hours, caused the Aldridge Institute administration to raise the alarm. Daniel Shaw was as meticulous as a Swiss watch. Missing 2 consecutive communications was unthinkable for him. Their journey to the Echo Cauldron took 2 days. Already on the approach, the group experienced what Shaw had so enthusiastically reported. A whisper, dropped by one of the guides to keep them on track, returned to them within seconds as a distinct, even haunting hum, as if someone had whispered directly into their ears. This caused not just bewilderment, but a vague, visceral anxiety. The terrain, already harsh, took on an ominous, almost animate quality. The tent was askew, one of the guy lines had been ripped out, and the edge was covered in fresh snow, although there was none yet in the valleys below. It looked as if it had been abandoned in haste, or that a sudden, localized squall had swept through it. Carl Ridgway, a young but promising geologist who knew Shaw personally, was the first to approach the entrance. "Dan, are you here?" His voice, amplified by the unnatural acoustics of the place, rolled across the amphitheater of rocks, returning as multiple distorted echoes that drowned out the original meaning. There was no answer. Ridgway unfastened the curtain and froze. The camp was in a strange, inexplicable state of disarray. It didn't look like it had been plundered by wild animals. Canned goods and food lay untouched in their proper places. The sleeping bag was neatly folded. A Primus stove stood on a small folding table, next to a mug with the remains of a long, cold coffee pot. But scientific equipment was scattered throughout the tent. The most troubling thing was the absence of his Canon camera. Ridgway remembered Shaw packing it with almost paternal tenderness into a special shockproof case. Now the case stood open and empty. "He wasn't gone for long," the ranger quietly stated, examining the tent. "The food's here, the sleeping bag's here. He went out and didn't come back." The search began. They combed the entire plateau and the surrounding slopes. There were no tracks, no scraps of clothing, no indication of where the scientist might have gone. The avalanche theory was immediately dismissed. There were no traces of a slide, no telltale snowdrifts. The animal attack theory also didn't hold water. There were no clumps of fur, no blood spatter, no claw marks on the tent or the ground. Ridgway, driven by scientific meticulousness and personal attachment, scrutinized every inch of the tent. Under one of the crumpled sheets of paper from the notebook, he found the last, unsent entry in Shaw's field diary. It was dated September 18, the very evening he went on the air for the last time. The handwriting, usually calligraphic and clear, was nervous and hurried, the letters jumping and overlapping each other. September 18, 1985, 6 p.m. The vocal experiment has been completed. The results defy description within the framework of known science. Echo, it is not passive. It possesses the attributes of structured intelligence. It does not repeat. It analyzes and produces a transformed signal. In response to the question, "Who are you?" I received my own voice, but distorted, as if passed through 1,000 filters, and in it were fragments. No, not words, feelings, longing, endless, universal longing, and loneliness. The stone does not simply record sound. The recording broke off. Ridgway reread it several times, filled with a chilling sense of dread. His colleague hadn't gone mad. He'd stumbled upon something beyond comprehension, and it had entered into a dialogue with him. The search continued for another 5 days. Dogs were used, but they too behaved strangely, losing the scent at the edge of the plateau, circling in place, whining and tucking their tails. A helicopter equipped with a thermal imaging camera detected no heat sources within a 10-kilometer radius. To the Aldridge Institute, he was a ghost, a grim reminder of the secret he left behind, at the heart of the Ridge of Silence, a secret to which his missing camera was the key. Almost 4 decades have passed. Daniel Shaw's story has become a legend, passed down in close circles of geologists and explorers of the unknown. A new era has dawned for the world, an era of total digitalization, satellite mapping, and unmanned drones. But some mysteries remain elusive, even to the most modern technologies. The summer of 2023 was unusually hot on the Ridge of Silence. The Petal Glacier, which had been sliding for centuries from the saddle between 2 peaks and overhanging the eastern edge of Echo Cauldron, retreated at an unprecedented rate, exposing rocks hidden for millennia beneath thick ice. This is what attracted an international team of glaciologists, led by Dr. Alice Rehnquist. Their task was to collect ice cores, ice samples, to study climate change. While working on a newly exposed area, Marco, a graduate student on Rehnquist's team, noticed a strange glint in the depths of a narrow, newly opened crevasse. At first, he thought it might be a piece of quartz or mica, but curiosity got the better of him. Risking his life, he lowered himself into the narrow opening. The ice here was perfectly clear, centuries old, without air bubbles. And deep within it, at a depth of about 3 meters, Marco saw something that took his breath away. It wasn't a stone. It was a backpack, a military backpack, the Alice model, popular in the 1980s. It was frozen in ice like a sarcophagus and preserved with eerie clarity. Every detail was visible through the crystal-clear ice, the durable khaki fabric, the metal buckles, and even the label on one of the pockets. Alice Rehnquist, summoned to the site, felt not scientific elation, but a vague sense of unease. She was familiar with the Shaw legend. Under her leadership, a complex operation was organized to extract the find. They didn't chop the ice so as not to damage the contents. Instead, they used drills with thermal attachments to carefully cut out a solid block of ice with the backpack embedded within. The work took 2 days. It was a delicate process, reminiscent of an archaeological excavation. When the last centimeters of ice melted and the backpack was finally retrieved, a deathly silence fell over the tent. Shaw's belongings, which had lain in the icy prison for 38 years, looked as if they had been placed there yesterday. The leather was supple, the fabric was durable. It was a time capsule, preserved by nature itself. With a sinking heart, Alice unzipped the main flap. Inside, perfect order reigned, a contrast to the chaos of his tent. A neatly folded sleeping bag, food packages, a first aid kit, a box of tapes for his voice recorder, folded maps, and, most importantly, his Marantz voice recorder in its protective case. Ridgway, in his 1985 report, specifically noted that the recorder had been abandoned in the tent, so Shaw hadn't brought it with him. Alice, methodically, wearing gloves, checked pocket after pocket. In one of the small side pockets, her fingers encountered something hard and angular. She unzipped it and pulled out an object that sent a chill through everyone present. It was a camera, a Canon AE-1 program, the very one that had been missing from the tent. It was in perfect condition, only slightly worn, and most importantly, it was loaded with film. The frame counter showed 36 exposures had been taken. The last shot had been taken. The mood in the camp that evening was excited yet uneasy. They had found more than just the missing explorer's personal belongings. They had found his message, the last thing his lens saw before he vanished forever. The film inside that camera was tangible evidence, a bridge spanning nearly 4 decades. It held the final moments of Daniel Shaw's life, or perhaps the key to understanding what happened to him. The silence of the echo cauldron seemed to watch them, following them with a heavy, silent gaze. The ice had surrendered its prize. Now they had to pay for this knowledge. The Aldridge Institute laboratory, where the finds were delivered, resembled an operating room. Strict sterility, temperature, and humidity controls were maintained. Shaw's camera wasn't just an artifact, it was a patient requiring resuscitation. Film that had lain for decades in extreme conditions could be rendered useless. The emulsion could crack, peel, or simply fade. The work was led by Dr. Iris Vanderlei, an expert in analog photography and archival preservation. She was the last hope. Students and colleagues who had heard the Shaw legend crowded the hallway, trying to catch the news. Inside the lab, a tense silence reigned, broken only by the clicking of equipment and Iris's subdued commands. The development process was as gentle as possible. Every step, from developer to fixer, was carried out with pinpoint precision, with constant monitoring of the temperature and pH of the solutions. When Iris finally removed the strip of film and carefully hung it to dry, everyone present held their breath as they stared at the still wet, matte frames. The first images were what one would expect from a field researcher, panoramas of the echo cauldron, rock formations, and a campsite. Shaw was apparently documenting his work, but as his gaze moved to the final frames, the atmosphere in the room changed.
Frame 31.
Night shot. Shaw had set up his camera on a tripod. In the foreground, his back to the lens, stood Shaw himself, illuminated by the dim light of a flashlight. He was backpackless, wearing only a windbreaker, his posture expressing concentrated anticipation.
He looked into the darkness,
Toward the black amphitheater of rocks.
They were fuzzy,
Blurry streaks and clumps of a cold bluish glow, forming abstract but clearly orderly patterns. They resembled the interference pattern of sound waves made visible.
Frame 33.
The glow on the rocks grew brighter and acquired structure. It now clearly resembled a giant, shimmering honeycomb or fractal grid. Shaw's figure in the foreground was sharply defined. He froze, staring at the spectacle.
Frames 34 and 35.
Almost identical. The glow had reached its peak intensity. Iris and her assistants, examining the images through a magnifying glass, noticed something unsettling. In these frames, a silhouette began to emerge in the center of the glowing grid, too tall and thin to be human.
Vague, blurry,
but unmistakably present. A shadow or a reflection.
Frame 36.
The last one.
There was no Shaw in this picture.
No glow, no mysterious silhouette.
The camera was pointed at the same spot.
But now, burned into the rock face at the very epicenter of the former glow, as if by lightning, was a perfectly smooth, pitch-black circle. It was so dark that it reflected no light, absorbing it entirely. It wasn't a shadow or a feature of the rock.
A deafening
Silence fell over the laboratory. Shaw's theories about the lithophonic effect turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. The stone didn't simply record sound. Under certain conditions, it could manifest it, or whatever lay behind it, as light and as a door.
Meanwhile,
A team of audio engineers worked on the recorder. To everyone's surprise, its electronics were found to be in working order after careful drying and battery replacement. The digital recordings were transferred to modern media.
most of the recordings were dry reports.
But the last one, dated September 18th, was different. First came Shaw's agitated voice, the same one broadcast over the radio. Then came a rising, unearthly hum that made the speakers vibrate even at low volume. And then silence.
But not the absence of a signal.
Analysis revealed that this was an active, aggressive silence, suppressing all frequencies. And in this silence, at the very edge of audibility, after amplification and filtering, sound emerged.
It wasn't a voice.
It was a pure, perfect, inhuman tone, like the striking of a mountain-sized crystal bell. It lasted exactly 7 seconds. Spectral analysis revealed no overtones or harmonics. It was a fundamental sound, a vibration at the core of matter itself,
A sound.
that shouldn't exist in nature.
Iris Wonderly
Leaned back from the table with the photographs laid out. She stared at the last 36th frame, the black hole in the rock and the abandoned backpack. She heard that same tone in her headphones, and she understood. Daniel Shaw hadn't simply disappeared. He'd taken a step
into another physics.
into another reality, the door to which Echo had opened. He was gone, leaving behind only the silent scream of the stone and a final question, frozen on the light-sensitive emulsion. What did he see on the other side of the black circle? The images and audio recordings retrieved from the Echo Cauldron were a bombshell at the Aldrich Institute. Daniel Shaw's story instantly moved from the realm of academic curiosity to the category of top-priority research, shrouded in strict secrecy.
A special working group was formed,
Comprising leading theoretical physicists, acousticians, geologists, and, at the urging of Alice Rehnquist, Dr. Iris Wonderly. The laboratory where the artifacts were now stored resembled a mission control center. Monitors displayed spectrograms, 3D models of the cauldron terrain, and pixel-enlarged scans of the final frames from Shaw's film. The physicists first attacked frame 36. The image of the black circle was subjected to every conceivable analysis.
It's not light absorption,
Said Dr. Arthur Lloyd, a quantum optics specialist, peering at the data. It's light denial. The pixels in that area aren't just black. They don't carry any information. The scanner's sensors acted as if there was nothing at that point. No matter, no energy.
It's a 0 point.
He compared it to the concept of a cosmological singularity, but on a microscopic, controlled scale. The stone wasn't destroyed, it was cancelled. At the same time, acousticians, led by Professor Mariam Youssef, were struggling with sound extracted from silence. "It's not just a tone," she said, moving her pointer across the spectrogram, which was a single, perfectly straight line. "It's an elementary vibration, a quantum of sound. It has no composition because it is the very basis. Our instruments record not the sound itself, but its gravitational disturbance in the medium." The echo he heard wasn't the reflection of his voice, but the fabric of reality's response to his question. The glowing patterns on the rocks captured on film were a visual manifestation of this standing wave, this ripple in the foundations of the universe. The most challenging task was integrating this data. Geologists provided a model of the cauldron's geological structure. It turned out that the basalt columns forming its amphitheater had a unique crystalline structure that acted as a giant piezoelectric transducer. They converted sound pressure into electrical impulses and vice versa, but on a scale that defied calculation. Wonderly concluded at another meeting, looking at the combined model. His lithophonic effect is only the first step. The stone doesn't simply record sound, it transmits it, but not into the ether, into something else. The echo cauldron isn't a tape recorder, it's a radio. A radio tuned to a frequency we can't perceive. Shaw didn't simply speak to the rock, he used it as a modem to communicate with something that exists beyond the known dimensions. The tone they recorded was, in their opinion, a handshake, an acknowledgement of communication, and the black circle in the last image was an open channel, a door. A central, agonizing question arose. Was Shaw's disappearance an unintentional tragedy, the result of an experiment gone wrong, or had he achieved his goal? Had he received an answer and followed it, taking a conscious step into the unknown, leaving his backpack behind as a symbol of his break with the old world? The evidence stubbornly pointed to the latter. The chaos in the tent spoke not of panic, but of hasty preparation, of a focus on the essentials. He had brought only a camera, a tool for capturing the truth. Everything else became irrelevant. They no longer called it an anomaly. They called it a contact phenomenon. The echo cauldron was recognized as a stable but passive transition zone, activated under strict conditions, specific sound frequencies, and possibly the unique mental state of the operator. The recommendation was unanimous and categorical. The area was to be closed to all activity and all research classified. Playing with this walkie-talkie was too dangerous. All they could hear was a handshake. What if someone tried to initiate a full-fledged dialogue? What or who might respond from the other side? The lab fell silent. The monitors went dark. Shaw's artifacts were stored in a safe, but knowledge, like a wormhole, had already penetrated the researchers' minds. They had touched something infinitely ancient and alien. The silence that followed this knowledge was heavier than any hum, was full expectations. The decision was insane, but inevitable. The people like Leo Mitchell, Daniel Shaw's protege and spiritual heir, some doors, once open, couldn't simply be closed. The formal ban and the top-secret classification weren't a death sentence for him, but a challenge. He spent months immersed in the working group's data, Shaw's notes and photographs. He didn't see them as a threat. He saw them as an invitation. His expedition was private, funded by dubious sources connected to tech moguls hungry for breakthrough discoveries. The team was small, selected for competence and discreetness. Leo himself, an experimental physicist, Cassia, an electronics engineer with a genius for creating custom measuring equipment, and Yorick, a former military man in charge of logistics and security. Their equipment was a generation ahead of what Shaw had used. Portable quantum magnetic field sensors, LiDARs for creating highly accurate 3D maps, microphone arrays capable of capturing sound from infrared to ultrasound, and modified cameras capable of recording not only visible light but also near-infrared. Their goal wasn't to replicate Shaw's experiment, but to understand it, to capture the very structure of the phenomenon. Shaw's tent had long since rotted away, but its traces could still be discerned on the ground.
The first day was spent deploying the equipment.
Kasia placed sensors around the perimeter of the amphitheater, creating an acoustic and electromagnetic map of the area. The first results were astonishing. The cauldron was not chaotic, but possessed a strict, inexplicable order. The infrasound here was not a random noise, but a stable, low-frequency note emanating from the very heart of the rock. The electromagnetic field was distorted. It pulsated at the same frequency as the tone Shaw had recorded, as if the entire valley were a giant resonator. On the second day, Leo decided on a cautious experiment. Using a portable sound generator, he produced a pure tone, close to the one in Shaw's recording, but a few hertz lower. The response was immediate. The echo returned, not distorted, but purified. "It's here," Kasia whispered, looking at the data. "The effect, it's stable. This isn't an accident. It's a system, alive." On the evening of the second day, something new happened. Yorick, checking the perimeter, noticed it first. He called the others on the radio, his voice tense and reserved. "Come here. Look at the rock." Fragments of images floated across it, like shadows from another time. A flash. The silhouette of a man with a raised hand. Shaw. A flash. The outline of that same tall, thin creature from the earlier photographs. A flicker of unfamiliar constellations, distorted faces. It lasted no more than a minute, and then the rock became just a rock again. "It's not a recording," Leo forced out, feeling his blood run cold. "It's a broadcast. It doesn't just preserve the past, it erases the border. It shows what's happening on the other side." They realized that the Echo Cauldron wasn't just a passive instrument. It was an active participant. It responded to their presence. It adapted, constantly displaying new properties. The contact phenomenon wasn't a one-time event, triggered by Shaw. It was a constant state of this place, merely awaiting the right interlocutor. Leo looked at the black amphitheater, at the very spot where the black hole had gaped in Shaw's photograph. Now there was only ordinary rock, but he knew the door hadn't disappeared. It was simply waiting for the right password, the right tone, the right question. And the most terrifying thing was that he, Leo Mitchell, had almost found it. His thirst for knowledge warred with his instinct for self-preservation. He stood at the threshold, feeling the titanic power of the phenomenon slowly, inexorably drawing him inside. The decision to conduct a decisive experiment matured in Leo not as a flash of insight, but as an inevitable outcome. The phenomenon was no longer an abstract anomaly. It was a rational interlocutor, inviting dialogue. Ignoring this invitation, after all he had seen, would have been tantamount to intellectual suicide. He gathered Kasia and Yorick near the tent. Twilight was deepening, painting the cauldron in deep blue tones. "We can't leave without trying," Leo said, his voice calm, but his eyes blazing with the same fire that must have been in Shaw's eyes that last night. "We won't take any chances. One impulse, the briefest impact. We'll just knock on the door." Kasia, usually unperturbed, nervously fiddled with the cable. "Leo, the data shows a non-linear response. We can't predict the response. It's like poking a sleeping dragon with a stick." "We're not poking with a stick," Leo countered. "We're saying his name. That same tone. Pure. Perfect. If the theory is correct, it won't cause a collapse. It'll be a polite hello." Yorick nodded silently. His job was to ensure security, but he understood that some threats couldn't be protected by a bulletproof vest. They set up equipment in the center of the plateau, opposite the ominous amphitheater. Kasia deployed a portable quantum processor capable of generating sound waves with precision down to a billionth of a hertz. An array of microphones and cameras was aimed at the point where the visions were appearing. Yorick took up a position on the outskirts, ready to initiate evacuation at a moment's notice. The air was still and ringingly quiet. Nature itself stood frozen in anticipation. Leo took a deep breath and nodded to Kasia. "Turn it on." She launched the program. That very tone poured from the powerful emitters, not loud but piercing, a vibration felt not by the ears but by the bones. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. The answer came instantly.
The echo didn't just return.
It overwhelmed them. It crashed, not as a wave of sound, but as a physical pressure that forced them to bend. The rocks at the epicenter flared with the same icy blue glow Shaw had seen, but now it was 1,000 times brighter, blinding and painful.
The light didn't just radiate,
It pulsed in time with the tone, and at its core, that same tall, thin silhouette appeared again. But this time it was clearer. It wasn't a shadow, it was a gateway.
and then they heard it.
Not through speakers or microphones. The sound was born right in their heads, bypassing their ears, cutting straight into their consciousness.
It was a voice.
The voice of Daniel Shaw, but devoid of anything human, timbre, emotion, age. It was a pure packet of information, meaning conveyed by vibration.
I am here.
I have become the sound. I am the echo. The phrase sounded not like a cry of despair, but like a statement of fact, like a formula, like the final truth.
Leo, gripped by both horror and awe,
Raised his head, shielding the light with his hand. He looked at the pulsating silhouette and understood. Shaw hadn't disappeared. He hadn't died. He had transcended. His material shell had been dismantled into its fundamental vibrations and inscribed into the very acoustic matrix of this place. He had become an integral part of the phenomenon, its voice, its guardian. The echo cauldron was more than just a door. It was a physicist's paradise, eternal life in the form of pure information, pure sound, resonating with the universe itself. The glow began to fade. The pressure eased. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was filled with a presence, aware, ancient, and indifferent to their petty human dramas. They broke camp in complete silence. No one said a word. What could they say? They had the answer to the main question. The price of this answer was their very picture of reality. As they left the plateau, Leo paused for a moment and looked back. The cauldron of echoes lay in the pre-dawn darkness, silent and still. But Leo knew. He knew that there, in the heart of the rocks, in the world beyond matter, Daniel Shaw had found what he sought. He had found the ultimate silence, and in it he became an eternal echo, whispering into the very ear of infinity. They left not with a sense of victory, but with the burden of a revelation too heavy for human understanding. Some truths, it turned out, were better left unspoken.